The mental health industry wants to say, you don't even have a mind, you have a brain. Not by anything you do. You're a slave to your brain based on your genetics. And you have this illness and you have this condition. It's all bullshit. It's all a lie. It's not supported scientifically. It's not supported by neuroscience. It's only supported by a marketing narrative to get you to attach to that lie. Once you attach to that lie, you are in their cult. And if you're in that cult, you are in their system. You're buying their ideas. You're taking their drugs and you're fueling an industry.
Welcome to the Mindform podcast, where we delve into the minds of some of the most interesting people on the planet, discuss psychology, philosophy, and personal growth, and share the wisdom we uncover with you. Join us as we explore the art of forming our minds. Here's your host, Frank Lawton.
Kia ora from New Zealand. Welcome to the Mindform podcast. An extension of the Mindform collective and training platform, this podcast is similarly a space dedicated to exploring and altering psychological landscapes together. In each weekly episode, I speak with a member of Mindform to extract wisdom, refine ideas, and collaborate on the game of architecting our minds. This week's guest is Dr. Roger McFillin. Roger is a clinical psychologist, founder of the Conscious Clinician Collective, and host of the Radically Genuine podcast. He is primarily renowned for his critical analysis of conventional psychiatric practices and his advocacy for evidence-based approaches. Specifically, he challenges the medicalized, diagnosis-heavy response to mental unwellness in the therapy room and the culture at large, and advocates for an approach centered on honesty and genuine relating. How are you doing this morning? Well, evening for you, Roger. What's alive in you?
Yeah, thanks, Frank. It's an honor to be here. Yeah, afternoon, the night before here in the United States. It's good to talk to you.
Awesome, man. So I want to start by getting a bit of a perspective on your mind and how you got to doing what you're doing. So perhaps you could tell us, just a bit about your growth journey. What are some key learnings and experiences that have informed why you do what you do today with the podcast, etc.?
A good question. I think I've always been obsessed with kind of the human mind and human potential. I think even from a young kid, I was just somebody who was very attuned to the energy and emotions of people around me and always had curious questions about why people behaved the way they behaved. Very sensitive to the suffering of people, which certainly led me to dive deep into various readings historically, get interested in psychology. And yeah, I think that natural curiosity brought me on a path to be working with people directly. I first started after undergrad working at Children's Psychiatric Hospital, and I was exposed to the way the contemporary psychiatric system treated young children who were suffering. I was working in a psychiatric hospital with ages 5 to 10. So you can imagine how young they were. They almost all came from adverse backgrounds and conditions, most of them abuse, neglect, poverty. And you would see them responding as one would who is under such dangerous conditions. So a lot of hypervigilance, anxiety, acting out, aggression, a lot of what they were observing in their homes. And this was back in 1999 through 2001. And you saw the model of the psychiatric industry label them as if they were experiencing a mental illness, and that mental illness would be corrected with a pharmaceutical drug. And I saw the deteriorating of young children who you would experience a range of side effects, some of them from just being sedated and sleeping 16 to 18 hours a day, others side effects from multiple drugs. It was clear we were experimenting on young children. And that lit a fire in me to continue my training and working in various settings. I eventually went and received a doctorate in clinical psychology. And I'm ultimately really interested in human resilience, how people move through suffering, how you kind of transform pain into growth and learning, and just examining both the scientific literature as well as like historical writings, ancient literature, wisdom that's passed down and that kind of gets lost in a Western society where the industrialization of help has kind of really took over and kind of what I see has been like a mind virus in a lot of ways, conditioning people to understand the human experience from a specific lens that drives the sale of their product, whether that product be a pharmaceutical drug or attention to a social media platform or a helping profession or the therapy industry. So it's certainly been something that's been commoditized, and within that, I think we have a distortion of what it means to be human, and there's a strong anti-human movement that really tries to benefit from us losing our collective humanity and our connection to, I think, higher powers, and just the spiritual aspect of the life experience.
Hmm. What do you mean by the term anti-human with this movement? Yeah.
Yeah, if you follow historically, I was just actually reading a book yesterday, Brave New World Revisited, and you see how old these ideas are. This kind of this view that human beings in themselves is kind of like a flawed species that needs to be
Right.
upgraded by technology. And many human beings are just really parasites who are just using resources and destroying the planet. Kind of an elitist perspective
Mm,
that dates back to um, trying to decrease population. The depopulation movement that has existed from elites. And just looking down at human beings if they're not in a specific class as just being somewhat threatening to
mhm,
their worldview. It's led to powerful movements in government and so forth. It's very strong. It's very strong now with the use of various technologies, right? Trying to upgrade or to change human biology. That's the transhumanist movement, maybe connecting us to AI, use of various technologies like mRNA technology, vaccines, genes therapies, ultimately altering who we are in a human body. And to do that, you have to be able to create a narrative that we're essentially broken
mm,
and that we don't have the ability to heal ourselves. And there's really no God and there's no higher power, and so you become dependent on the godlike status of an authoritarian figure or a medical establishment or medical profession, which here in the United States, we have a very strong like adherence to a medical authority. We're one of the sickest nations on earth. So our culture here is one that has driven a large percentage of our population to become dependent on certain medical uh, interventions. And we've been conditioned through fear to rely on medical professionals, and what you see is a deteriorating health and culture. We're poisoned by the chemicals in our food sources. We're provided more vaccines than any other country, which are disrupting our natural immune system. We have a chronic disease epidemic in the United States and a mental health crisis. So someone like me is trying to get to the root of that, and I can't ignore the nefarious components that actually drive that, as well as the belief systems that are pushing people to really surrender their autonomy and to become dependent on various authority figures, including the medical establishment. So I'm very interested in what can control the mind and pull people away from what I think is a natural instinct toward health, toward love, towards connection with others. And fear does that.
right. So this anti-human, it's the view that human beings are a problem to be fixed, and that there's something insidious. I can see at the face of it of a psychology of that or a worldview like that, and you're saying that that disseminating that view, the popularity of that view, is beneficial to some people because they're able to create like economic dependency. People view themselves as a problem to be fixed. They're going to pay you to fix them, that sort of thing. Right, right. And maybe there's a little lack of agency or worth as well that comes from seeing yourself as a problem.
And certainly there's a political benefit to that. So, people who do see themselves are broken are much more easily influenced and controllable.
Mm,
And if you're coming from a perspective of authoritarian ideas in a government that's trying to limit the freedom of its population, then there's real benefit for people to be in fear and to see them as like unworthy or even broken, because it's through that fear in which you can be easily controlled, which we've seen throughout history. That's something you can't ignore,
of
and
course.
which we've seen pretty profoundly in 2020.
Mm, Mm. Okay, so just to kind of paint a picture, so consider like a map in a landscape, right? The landscape is this journey you've been on. You've been through these different parts of the medical and psychiatric world, and you're here. And then the map is your beliefs and goals, right? It's you're painting the picture of this world. You're adjusting it a number of times to figure out how things work. Where do I want to go? My question is like, what there's sort of two questions here. One is what's the X? Like, what's the X marks the spot? What's the place you've been trying to get to this whole time? What's the ideal for you? What's the value? What's the virtue? Whatever. And then, yeah, I'll start with that, and then I'll ask my next question.
Yeah, it's a good question because it was very clear to me that the industry that I was brought into, that I was trained to be a member of, wasn't producing positive outcomes. It was quite the opposite.
Right.
If you look into the data in the psychiatric industrial complex, the Western mental health system, it's almost like once you get in, you don't come out. So the more therapy and the more drugs that we provide, the worse the collective mental health of our society becomes. So we're prescribing drugs that have very poor efficacy, serious safety concerns, and create dependence. They're called medicine. The doctors who are prescribing them and the therapists who are providing therapy are indoctrinated into this idea that it's medicinal and it's creating some underlying biological abnormality. That's all a lie. That's all marketing. So you push people into adopting these ideas of mental illness. I have this, I have that, and you medicalize the human experience is you are influencing the identity of the person and how they view themselves
Hmm.
in the world, and they're entering into that system, and the system has become more about managing somebody's symptoms, managing mental illness, not any true recovery, not seeing emotional and behavioral struggles as legitimate responses to stressors in your life that you can move through and even grow through, but rather getting you to be in an internal fight with your own emotions, which is going to only create more suffering. And so when I realized I was part of this indoctrinated system, me as an independent and critical thinker wanted to pull myself away from it and observe it from multiple lenses. What I'm trying to do right now, where I'm at, is I'm trying to wake people up to what is actually happening. The mass conditioning, the identifying with DSM diagnoses as if they're
Hmm.
legitimate, discrete medical conditions that require you to be in the medical system, and also to just develop a new relationship with your emotional pain, suffering, and the content of your
Hmm.
mind. When you're able to, see yourself as a spirit inhabiting a body and the multiple challenges that exist, an understanding that the mind and body work hand in hand with each other, that emotions are gifts, they're signals that are telling you that there might be something in your life you have to address, and they're there for you. You take on a different relationship and you move through challenges in your life, and they're episodic. That's the interesting thing when you start looking at historically the data about what we call like depression is a great example. About a quarter of the United States population will identify being severely depressed in a year. Like a quarter of our population. Historically, that would, looking back at like epidemiology, there's work done by a woman by the name of Charlotte Silverman uh, who wrote the book The Epidemiology of Depression. So she was looking back at the 1940s, 30s, 20s, challenging times that which included war, which included Great Depression. Less than 1% of the population would ever identify themselves as being severely depressed at one given time, and they always related it to events in their lives. So what happens is through the mass conditioning through the pharmaceutical industry, and I think New Zealand and the United States are the only two countries who have direct to consumer advertising from pharmaceutical companies. You begin to say, "Oh, what you're feeling is a medical illness due to a chemical imbalance." And if you want to induce suffering, then you get people to not view their emotions as a signal to be able to face problems in their lives, but you say that it's inherently something that's biologically or genetically broken within you that requires a pharmaceutical. That gets you in the system. That gets you identifying with a mental condition. That gets you to see the world as everything you go through is related to that degree of
Mm.
brokenness, and it will create lifetime customers, which is their ultimate goal. When you're a pharmaceutical sales person, you want to create more people who are going to purchase their drugs. Obviously, that's born out of marketing rooms and pharmaceutical companies. They've done a fantastic job of being able to influence medical training and the culture at large. And Unfortunately, that's kind of where we're at, where at least in the United States, 25% of the population to 30% potentially on at least one psychiatric drug. I mean, that's insane.
It is insane. Um, yeah. uh, people, the way people make decisions, right? The way and people's capacity to make decisions that make a difference come from their perspective on what is the cause, right? There's a whole bunch of factors going on. It's the perspective of what's the problem, what's the cause, what's the solution. And it sounds like your mission a little bit is to get people out of this perception that the cause is an error, a brokenness in me. And then because that's an unsolvable problem, right? When that's the cause, the solution is drugs, the solution is therapy for years and years and years, etc. But if you can get a shift to the cause, okay, maybe it's something going on in your life, maybe it's contextual. I think one of the reasons, a quick pushback on that would be common, although I do agree with you. But to your sort of remark about, okay, people would have self-identified as depressed maybe 1%, and now it's 30%, is, there's more awareness, there's more conversation. I'd be interested to hear how you challenge that. One possible challenge that I can think of is, and you also said those 1%, they would point to something in their lives. I think nowadays, the cause of our depression, the cause of our, maybe use another word, the cause of our misery, the cause of our dissatisfaction or hopelessness, whatever, is it's not always so pinpointable. It's the world we live in, right? It's the familiar. It's the corporatization, the consumerism, the disconnection from nature, from ourselves, from other people. When it's all you've ever known, it's hard to pinpoint that as a cause of that's why I'm sad. So what's left, right? Oh, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the problem. So, but yeah, what would you say to challenge people who say, of course, there's more diagnosis of depression now. We're just aware of it. We're talking about it more.
Well, you're right, because we are creators of our own reality. So what we create in consciousness becomes real. And that's the freedom that we have in this world, is we're active creator beings. Where we focus our attention is going to be the reality of our life. So if you do want to focus your attention inward on yourself, on anything that could potentially be wrong with your life, well, you're going to create suffering. That's always been known. And that is the nefarious aspect of a lot of this marketing of mental health awareness, is because the psychology of this is that you would know that you get more people to focus inward on themselves and anything that may be going wrong with themselves. You're going to inherently create more emotional struggles, because that is not how human beings thrive. Human beings thrive exactly in the way that you spoke about it. The more we get disconnected from nature, the sicker we become. And what do I mean by nature? Well, that means not only being in the natural world, but connecting with others, in service of others, with passion, with purpose, eating foods that are real foods, that service the body, moving the body, being exposed to the sun. All these things are natural to us. And so when you remove us from those experiences, we're going to retreat inward into our minds. And the minds themselves are meaning-making machines. And so they will create stories, they will create realities. And if you want to focus on every single feeling that you have, or you want to focus on aspects of your life where you're unsatisfied, and you don't turn that into action for change, and you're told it's related to a chemical imbalance, one that no one ever tests for, and there's no empirical test, and one that doesn't exist, well, of course, I mean, that is going to drive more people feeling depressed. So both things can be true. There can literally be more people who are suffering because of what we've done culturally. And the more attention we bring to it as a disease state that you have to focus on, that's going to increase the amount of people that are suffering. And it all works together. You have to understand who gets to value, who gets to benefit from creating that type of narrative. There's so many industries that get to benefit from that. In a world that focuses on materialism, wants you to buy their product, wants you to buy their ideas, people know, marketers know, that emotional distress, insecurities, and any type of emotional struggling, if you can create some vision that they can save you from that you act like me, you dress like me, you look like me, you pay attention to this, will save you, and you will feel better, and you'll live like these people who are going to be presenting, happiness, this is social media too. You present people who are living a full life, and they're living a full life because they bought this product or they do these things. Also, like when you're the media, when you're the government, eyeballs on you, creating more people who are going to attend to a narrative that serves whatever their interest may be. All these things are driving our focus and attention, and we're getting more disconnected from the only place we can live, which is the now. The more people are going to live in their heads, the more sicker we're going to become, and that's exactly what's going to
Hmm.
happen. So every available research will suggest a couple things. The more you want to focus on your mental health, the more miserable you're going to be. I guarantee it. We see this when we try to implement this stuff in the schools, and we create programs to get people to focus on mental health, and we compare it to a control group. When that happens, the control group generally does fine. Kids, adolescents are quite resilient. And if you start providing them all this mental health intervention of all these things they need to focus on with their mental health, what ends up happening is those kids end up reporting more anxiety, worse mood, they struggle more. So you have to ask the question, why do we intervene more? Do we have worse outcomes? And that's the question I've been asking myself for at least a decade now.
Mm. All right. So one of the main questions I have had coming into my conversation with you is around this issue, right? Like, where are we putting our attention and what impact does that have? Um, the way you're describing it now, it really sounds like you're saying that thinking about giving attention to what's going on internally, mental health, addressing mental health, whether that's through school interventions or whatever, exacerbates the problem. Would it be? I don't agree with that, but this is what I do think, and I'm wondering. I'm interested to hear your response. So, is it that we're paying attention to it, or is it how we're paying attention to it? Is it the language we use? Right? Is it that we have a look for problems approach when we're looking, or do you think that it is the case that just thinking about the mind, reflecting all of that stuff, just ruminating of any form is inherently harmful to mental health? If that's what you think, why?
Yeah. First of all, let's define what mental health is. It's a
Good
relatively
point.
new term, right? Mental health is, in my opinion, is just the consequence, a byproduct of the life you're living. So if I'm living a life of purpose and meaning, I'm active, I'm contributing, I'm exercising, I'm engaging with people around me, I'm in service of others, I might be creative, I might have spark inside me that wants to grow something or build something. Your attention is focused on that. Um, People end up feeling pretty engaged in life, right? And then even in life like that, life is still going to bring about pain. There's a polarity that exists. Like you can't experience love unless you understand loss, right? You can't understand freedom, and you can't experience freedom unless you've had the loss of it. You don't know health unless you've experienced its dialectical opposite in sickness. So what happens is all of those experiences are part of the human collective, right? They are what serves us and
Hmm.
allows us to experience the full ranges of emotions in this human life. Well, what happens if you pathologize the dark?
Right.
You pathologize the dark, you're really going to prevent people from finding their light. And that's what's happened. So back to your question about how we approach it. Yes, we did a meditation prior to coming on camera here. And I got to sit back and direct my attention inward, away from my mind. My mind might have still been activated from the therapy session I just conducted before I came on the screen. It might have been thinking about things I have to do in about 2 hours from now, which would have taken me away from the only moment that I have to live, which is now. This is the most important moment of my life because it's the only moment I have. But the nature of human existence is that we have a survival brain. That survival brain wants to go into the future. It might reflect on the past. It will create stories. It'll create judgment. All that affects the body. If we don't have the ability to observe that internal experience without attachment to it, then it runs our lives and we are living in an alternative reality than what actually is. And we're not present in the moments that we have. The consequences of that can be the range of what you'd experience from whatever your mind is creating. could be anger, could be fear, anxiety,
Mhm.
sadness, loss, right? Whatever the mind creates, then you are controlled by that mind. And what I want to tell people, you are not your mind. And so the mental health industry wants to say, you don't even have a mind, you have a brain. And you are a slave to that brain, not by anything you do. You're a slave to your brain based on your genetics, and you have this illness and you have this condition. It's all bullshit. It's all a lie. It's not supported scientifically. It's not supported by neuroscience. It's only supported by a marketing narrative to get you to attach to that lie. Once you attach to that lie, you are in their cult. And if you're in that cult, you are in their system. You're buying their ideas, you're taking their drugs, and you're fueling an industry. Right. Now, if that had any positive benefit at all, and trust me, I've tried to prove myself wrong in all aspects of this. I've talked to experts around the world. I started a podcast. I'm a voracious reader about all research and science. So I compare the Western narrative to even third world countries, right? To countries that are supposedly less evolved, right? We have the highest rates of schizophrenia, mental illness, depression, anxiety. We are suffering in a way that has never been measurable in human history. Why would I continue to buy your ideas? Why would I continue to buy your drugs? Where is the evidence? Where is the evidence that any idea that's implemented in any medical intervention that's been implemented has led to a positive outcome in our culture? Our culture is deteriorating. It's a difficult time here in the U.S. We're seeing mass violence. We're seeing separation. Almost feels like such a strong culture war that erupts in some ways into almost like a civil war. If you're following what's happening here in the United States, Charlie Kirk just got assassinated yesterday. He was a prominent figure on the right here in the United States, a man of faith. And all that happens is it creates more division in our country. And it dominates people's attention, and of course, then people are responding in anger and fear and grief. And it's the unfortunate reality of kind of the culture that we're facing. And there's no doubt about it that those forces have been driven into the United States from within. We've seen what the United States intelligence agencies have done through mass conditioning, not only in our country but around the world, in order to implement behavioral psychological controls to try to mass manipulate and try to influence the population. We see it played out right in front of us. Anyone who has a background in behavioral science can see exactly how easily it can get manipulated. And if the United States falls, the West falls. And I feel like a lot of us is that we're under attack. We are under attack in the United States, our physical health, our mental health, and the unfortunate consequences is you continue to observe a deteriorating culture. I shouldn't be as busy as I am as a psychologist. In a thriving culture, a mental health industry shouldn't be thriving the way it is.
It is amazing how, you talk about, and someone who doesn't know would hear what you're saying. You talk about the US government's attempts, various experiments over the years, sometimes at mass scale, of mind control, of influence. And it sounds crazy, but it's incredible the amount of documents that exist on government websites. They're official documents and they've just been released over time, and you can look at them, they're publicly available, and you read them, and it's incredible how much of that is true if you look into it. And another example of something that's obviously true, if you look into it, is it's what you say about the vast majority of psychiatric drugs, right? Is that they don't help, and the sort of the jury's in on that if you actually look at the data. And Ryan in the chat here asked a question about that. How is it the case that so many people who have studied psychiatry, psychology, whatever for years, and it's their job and it's their profession, can believe that psychiatric drugs solve the problems and are even worth the side effects or the times where they make the problems worse? How can so many people believe that when there are at this point just enough meta-analyses and data to prove unequivocally that doesn't work, and that there's basically no evidence for it? How is that the case?
Yeah, I've tried to write extensively on kind of this psychological operation that happens, and there's a number of ways for it to occur. The first of it, a lot of the studies that you're referring to, first of all, are um, originally developed by the pharmaceutical companies themselves. So they're the ones who conduct the research, and they use their data in order for it to receive government approval. Okay. Um, the problems in the system is that money is highly influential. So first of all, the pharmaceutical companies for the United States FDA, they fund about 60% of their budget. The job of the FDA is really to get drugs to market. The pharmaceutical company then can then hire academic thought leaders to act as, pretty much salespeople. When it comes to the attempt to try to study drugs long term, there's not a lot of incentive to do so. So you don't really see independent research. It's kind of a myth that we have a ton of science out there on the safety or efficacy of drugs. Let's use SSRIs, for example. Most of those studies are extremely short term, 6 to 8 weeks. They have negligible differences in comparison to placebo. If a study does not serve the interest of the psychiatric establishment or the pharmaceutical industry, they just bury that study.
just doesn't
And
get
there's some,
published. Yeah.
yeah, it doesn't get published. So publication bias exists. And then they are heavily invested in training the next group of physicians and prescribers and psychologists and therapists. So they invest a lot of money into influencing textbooks. And so narratives are created, and you get sold this lie, this version of evidence-based medicine, and you think it's scientific and you think it's ethical. And so there's a level of brainwashing that occurs, and you have so much invested in it as a student because you dedicate a lot of money to receiving the degree. You go into, pretty significant debt, and now you're really a slave then to what the system has already been created to do. And once you get out there and you start working, then you're bombarded by pharmaceutical propaganda, salespeople, lunches, and what they're doing is they're selling a narrative to you about the efficacy of a drug. You don't have a lot of time. You're a medical professional, at least in the United States. You have about 8 minutes. You've become following protocol medicine. They're not really staying on top of the literature. They don't have the time to do so. And the literature that is out there, if anything, somebody's going to look only at the abstract and maybe the conclusions. Those are manipulated often. They don't even fit the data. It's an industry that has manipulated the public and professionals to such an extent that you have to be a dissident. You have to be a critical thinker. You have to be independent in order to be critical of it. And that's what you see. You see the rising movement of harmed patients, and you see those who are critical of the status quo, but most of the people who are critical are independent. Like, I own my own center. So I have the freedom to be able, I don't work for anyone but myself. So I have the freedom to speak out. Or maybe you're a head of a certain network like Joanna Moncrief, the Critical Psychiatry Network. There's you have to be independent. I talk to a lot of people who, share with me privately that there's really nothing they can do. They'd lose their job, they'd lose their livelihood.
Right. Yeah. So it's financial dependency, but also, yeah, people are busy and they just take what's said the loudest and the most often at face value. And, I suppose why wouldn't you? So that's understandable that as an explanation for why the action of professionals doesn't fit the data and what actually works. So when you were talking a bit before, the language was really strong against basically, you said something along the lines of all of what our society, what the industry has to offer people in terms of help for mental illness, right, is no good, and or making things worse, at least contributing to this problem of the medicalization of self, which creates this dependency, etc. Is it all of, right? That's my question. Yeah, because you obviously you just came from doing a session with somebody. So
Yeah.
what are the bits that work? I mean, it's clear to see, for example, one thing that's always irked me is a part of sort of the culture and especially the, like, the influence culture around self-care that sort of says uh, engaging in self-destructive temptations and avoiding things that make you uncomfortable is looking after yourself. You know,
Yeah,
just
right.
but treat yourself, self-care. Or there was an example in one of your articles, of a girl who's like, oh, I need to I'm not going to come to your bride's party or whatever it is because I need to set boundaries for my mental health. So I can understand that. I critique that. But there are also, there are ways of dealing with anxiety that work, right? Exposure therapy is well understood to work. A facilitated, safe relational context where people support you to encounter the thing you're afraid of in incremental doses and sort of learn to stay regulated and see the thing for what it is. So stuff works, and there are people out there who do what works. What's the stuff that works?
Yeah, good question. And I don't want to paint with broad strokes. So when I'm talking about the industry, I'm talking about what is standard and what is contemporary. And what
Hmm.
what I'm going to talk about, I'll tell you, is absolutely rare because it's very difficult for me to hire mental health professionals who can articulate this and do this type of work. So it's quite rare.
Hmm.
And even when they're doing uh, interventions like exposure therapy, for example, which is essentially like a belief in a person's ability to regulate their own emotions, and very established scientific information that supports that the more we expose ourselves to something, a stimuli that's fear provoking initially, that what happens is that we habituate to that, we learn, and we overcome it. And I think we can reflect back on our entire lives and say, I was scared of something until I faced it and overcame it. Right. So the fact that a mental health professional would move away from the diagnostic system, the limitations of the labels, and all the cultural programming that has taken place, because I even see people who do exposure therapy and recommend them to go on drugs. That's dumb. It makes no sense logically, reasonably, or scientifically, because the value of an exposure therapy is the intensity of the exposure to the stimuli predicts the outcome. So, what I want to do eventually is be able to get a person up a hierarchy to be able to face that fear, the highest fear, and I want to be able to facilitate the maximum intensity of fear as part of the exposure, because that is what that does is it maximizes what's called inhibitory learning. So inhibitory learning is essentially you go from I can't handle this to oh, I can handle this. So you have the maximum fear and the thoughts, you move past it, that's a robust learning experience. You don't want to get in the way of that robust learning experience. You don't want a safety behavior, you don't want avoidance, you most certainly don't want alcohol, you don't want a drug, anything that diminishes the intensity of the experience
Hmm.
diminishes the outcome. So to try to tell someone to go on a drug that is going to mute the experience is counterproductive to the actual intervention. It makes no sense. And it's only marketing that has pushed people to do that. So it's very, very hard, like for me to find somebody who understands that. Like I don't want to take someone with severe OCD and do exposure and response prevention and then say, here, take this drug. It's going to make you feel better. A drug that is going to create dependency, has a range of side effects, has very poor efficacy, and it's probably going to get you dependent. Like that makes no logical or reasonable sense. And I'm tired of people just blindly following the narrative. But going back to your question, yes, there are short term interventions. First of all, human beings essentially work well with each other. So if you're lonely, if you're struggling, if you're depressed, in the context of a caring relationship with another person, we can thrive. So there's benefit to that, right? Someone to talk to, especially if you're lonely, someone who might be objective, right? So like in the professional help system, like you've got all these people in your life who are trying to influence you. Now you go into an environment where a professional is supposed to be objective and be able to help you. As long as they're supporting your natural resiliency to move through something, it can be an effective intervention. Unfortunately, that's just not what we're seeing. We're seeing people going into the mental health system, not leaving it, being in therapy for years, that in itself being the coping mechanism. So what happens is anytime that someone goes through a challenge or a struggle, they have to go right back to their therapist, as if it's their therapist is going to be the person who's going to direct them out of that. That's counterproductive. Good therapy is going to get the client to be able to see that it lies within them. It lies within them to face what they're exists. Now, certainly, some people come from adverse conditions, maybe uh, haven't obtained some of the skills that are necessary to function really well in life. So I think there's opportunity for people to practice skills and teach skills. But what you see is when you examine the literature, what's most effective is understanding problems to be in context, helping them solve those problems, resiliency, skill building, problem focused work, and then support their natural recovery, their natural resilience, and
Mm-hmm.
move them on. The longer you keep them in that setting, the longer they identify or self identify with whatever that problem is. And in the worst of it, obviously, they adopt the mindset that there's something broken within and they have to be in the system for the rest of their life, managing their condition.
Yeah, I started recently listening to an audiobook version of Carl Jung's The Discovery of the Unconscious, and obviously a huge influential book, and speaks a lot as well to the history of the development of the psychological field. And it was baffling to me that what you're saying right now is exactly what this book was saying, and I've read around. I'm aware that that is the most legitimate approach. It's what actually works. Exposure therapy, safe relational context, etc. And I was just baffled that it does. It certainly presents an argument for your case that actually there are interested parties controlling the narrative here, because that's been known since, I don't know, Carl Jung. What was that? The 30s. 1930s, that the way you help people is by supporting their capacity to face scary things in the present. It's a present thing as well. Even Carl Jung, who's talking about the unconscious, and he's a student of Freud, who introduced the whole idea that things in your early experience are the cause of what's going on, or are cause of what's going on, what's wrong in your life, trauma, etc. Even those with that view, the solution has to be present focused. The solution is the development of courage, the development of resilience, the development of capacity, and it's through relationship and it's through exposure. So it's just baffling that that was well understood by the pioneers in this field almost 100 years ago, and yet no one's saying that, or not enough people, I should say, are saying that. So yeah, it does make it seem like a bit of a psyop, doesn't it?
It certainly feels that way to me. It has all the makings of it. And listen, the U.S. intelligence agencies through MK Ultra have been very integrated into psychiatry in the United
Mm-hmm.
States as a control mechanism, and have worked on major campuses in the United States. And so, uh, anything, I'm very sensitive to any narratives that take away human freedom, human agency, and are creating an alternative narrative, because as we mentioned earlier, like, we are creators, we are creator beings. So what the mind creates is one's reality, and we have to be
Mm-hmm.
very careful about how vulnerable we are to the messages seeping in and influencing us.
Are there any drugs that you see as having value in any context? Now, that in the context of medical intervention, or maybe to use language that's more appropriate to the worldview we have, supporting people to develop mental resilience, etc. Um, I would also include in that question the drugs that are kind of just starting to be looked at, not numbing, dulling drugs, but opening drugs, right? Um,
Psychedelic,
psychedelics. Um,
psychedelics, yeah.
yeah, psychedelics, LSD, mushrooms, etc. get used. Some people go on these DMT experiences. I have a friend who's done that, and it's been really formative for his development. So, yeah, I'm curious, where do chemicals help, if they do at all, and which ones?
Okay, so let's talk about the pharmaceuticals that are, chemicals made in a factory. Yeah, yes, there is value to short-term uh, interventions, medical pharmaceuticals in terms of a crisis intervention in the short term. So, like, for example, a benzodiazepine is extremely powerful and it works, right? The problem with a benzodiazepine is as early as the first week, you're going to start building tolerance to it. They're highly addictive. You create dependence, obviously, very, very quickly. But if someone hasn't slept for like 5, 6, 7 days because they're in such a heightened state of fear and they can't slow their mind down, using that in a crisis intervention could be valuable. Somebody might be in a psychotic state that becomes dangerous to themselves or somebody else. And so, a tool from the medical professionals to induce a state of consciousness that might protect somebody is useful as long as we keep it that, right? But
Hmm.
that does not fuel an industry. That's not very lucrative. And actually, the people that need that type of intervention are few and far between. So if we saw it as just emergency medicine, then I think we can talk reasonably about how they can be used. It's not how they're sold. It's not how they're marketed. Now, then there's like plant-based medicines and natural occurring chemicals and things that have been used in nature
Well, like
and in
ashwagandha or
cultures.
something as a nervous system regulator, right? That'd be an
Those
example.
those exist naturally, and I would say indigenous cultures, um, uh, other cultures around the world outside of Western societies have been able to use those things uh, uh, within their communities for millennia, yeah, right? So almost from the dawn of time. Psychedelics are very interesting and powerful, what I call a spirit molecule. I think it requires a lot of responsibility. I am concerned about the consumer culture of Western societies and trying to market it in a way that it's not traditionally been utilized. I do think it can lead to higher states of consciousness and insights. Actually, I know it does. And I know that it's healed people from some of the most horrific traumas where any other approach hasn't. So I'm a supporter of the investigation of that, but I do that with great caution, respect, and responsibility that it's not a party drug, to play around with. That it's something that I think you have to have adequate preparation, knowledge, and also working with a guide, and then you need to integrate the experience in a way that serves your better understanding of your life path. And so I just caution people that needs to be done responsibly and be very careful. And of course, there's different psychedelics from MDMA, for example, is much different than psilocybin, right? Maybe there's a benefit for MDMA
Categorically.
in certain situations, right? But I am interested and in my field because ultimately what I want to do is be able to help people move through suffering and go from pain into like power and transformation. And I think there's various approaches to being able to do that. And I'm most sensitive to those have been traumatized or experienced some of the kind of the most challenging moments that could exist on this earth. From being in combat veterans, loss of friends, family, children, the traumatic suffering that can exist that could lead somebody to no longer believe life is worth living, but have been able to say that a psychedelic altered their perspective in a way that let them change their life in a higher state of consciousness. They became more loving, more forgiving. To me, that's extremely important to investigate and to understand.
Mm. Yeah, just to speak to the caution, with psychedelics. I did one huge LSD experience with a few good friends when I was, gosh, 18, 19, and I see it as an anchor point. I was with my I went on a camp with my church a couple of weekends ago, and we did like a graph where you like map your sense of spiritual connectedness over time, with like a line, which was a bit of fun. And I was drawing it, and there was this point where it was kind of just dipping down, and then it just inverted, and there's been an upwards trajectory ever since. And I was reflecting, and I was like, oh, that was when I took acid. That's what did that. So I certainly see it as, it just opened my perspective to, oh, there are completely different ways I could look at reality, and there's more depth and more richness to this experience than I was aware of, that I'd shut myself off from. And I didn't know, who knows if I would have opened up to that without that experience. But at the same time, a friend of mine who was in that experience with me, he kept taking LSD and he did it recreationally, um, uh, you know, maybe half a dozen times a year, maybe more. He's not around anymore. So, uh, Yeah. So it's another example, I suppose, of um, I guess the dose makes the drug, or the dose makes the poison, right? Um,
Yeah.
things nothing's good or bad, but there are problems in how we approach, how we use. I would encourage a lot of people to have that experience, but I would certainly just discourage people from doing it over and over and over again. So I've got strong feelings both ways. Like the high point and the low point of my life are related to that drug, LSD specifically. So yeah, I see where you're coming from.
Set and setting matters, the
Yeah.
intention and purpose around it, right? If it's just used as a way to escape reality, it can become very dangerous.
What about diagnoses? Right? Is there value to that? There are obviously different kinds of diagnoses. There's what I see as the more bullshit ones, which are medical terms for normal emotional experiences that do vary in intensity based on experiences or times in your life, like anxiety, like depression. I mean, those are literally just terms for emotions. Um, and so that I see as a bit more bullshit. But there's also diagnostic terms for there's personality disorders, there's developmental abnormalities like ADHD is understood as that by some people, autism, right? So what's your understanding of when and where diagnoses are helpful or not?
The problem is the way that the diagnostic system was created. It was created as a categorical diagnosis and not dimensional. And meant it was distorted to fit the current medical system.
Hmm.
It was never actually meant to be an identification of discrete medical conditions. It was originally meant just for a way to categorize and communicate. So I understand that development, but you could probably there's over 300 diagnoses in the DSM. It's become something that makes the American Psychiatric Association millions, if not billions, over the course of time, and it's
Billions.
yeah, billions. It's highly influential, um, and it's become a real problem in our culture, obviously, and it's extended itself to serving other industries. If there was just a dimensional aspect, like if you said yes, there's a range of people who struggle with their mood, and that's on a dimension, and you're open about the myriad of potential root causes to that, but you just want to categorize this person's struggling with their mood here. This person might be experiencing a sleep condition. This one is experiencing with fear and anxiety, and that could range from obsessive compulsive conditions to social anxiety or so forth. It's just on this continuum, and you just use it to categorize psychotic conditions, for example. And that's all, because it's self-limiting. It's scientifically invalid, and it's self-limiting. And so what has occurred is you have people don't know any better, believing it's scientifically valid, and using it like any other medical diagnosis, like tuberculosis or strep throat. Like it's none of those things. And so when we have an entire culture that comes in and says, "I am bipolar. I have depression. I have this." Right? And so now they have adopted that identity and
It's
they
a
see the
hilarious
world.
word.
Yeah.
Have, like it's a virus or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and you really have to decondition somebody. Like, and that's part of my work. I have to kind of decondition them, r you know, so they're no longer brainwashed. There has to be some education around it. I have to tell them what that is and what it's not. And then once we're there, then I can understand who this person is. There was a time in my career where people wouldn't call into my center and say, we'd have an intake coordinator who does a phone evaluation. What are you coming in for? People would say, well, I'm having troubles in romantic relationships, and I feel really down. I just lost, the ending of a relationship, and I feel like I'm kind of it's hard to get going, and I feel a lot of anxiety in forming connections. Now people just say, I have social anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, and ADHD, which gives us absolutely nothing. We know nothing from that perspective,
Agreed.
right? And that's the problem.
So yeah, so it's not the use of terminology to be able to understand. Okay, people with these kinds of experiences, these kind of toolkits can help them, or whatever it is. It's the simplicity. It's the really low resolution of the system. It's the fact that our minds are multidimensional, multifaceted, and yet we just have. Is this your problem? Is this your problem? And the understanding that depression isn't. What depression is, and this is at my uni anyway. This is one of the first things I learned. When I was doing abnormal psychology, which was a course we had. Um, One of the first things I learned was, these don't exist. They're terms, they're useful terms, and people who really understand can appreciate that. So I think, by the way, there are some differences between the US and New Zealand in this, and it sounds like it's a bit more dire there. So I was saddened to hear that it can be that awful. But yeah, that depression isn't a thing you get or have. Depression is a term we use to describe collections of behavioral, emotional, whatever symptoms or experiences that come together that deviate from normal, and we can bunch under that things that help. And now there's still errors there. There's still flaws in that because it's not a high resolution term, because it can have false ideas of what the cause is. But that was one of the first things I learned. But I've noticed that people can be really defensive about that. So you say, the first thing I have to do is unbrainwash people, right? Brain dirty people. And so I read that book, Lost Connections, by, I think that was a Johann Hari book. But basically, it was a treatise. It was a manifesto, really saying that, okay, the reason for anxiety, depression in our culture, or much more of the reason that people credit it, is that we've lost our connections. We're not connected to each other, to nature. We don't have meaningful work, etc., etc. It's not a chemical imbalance. And I read that book, and I'd read studies. I was like, okay, this is true. This is fantastic. And I'd start trying to talk to people about it because I was interested about it. And people got really offended, or maybe even concerned or afraid by that narrative. And so I wonder what your sense is of why not the industry, but individuals themselves might be really protective of the idea that they have a chemical imbalance, or that the cause of mental unwellness is medical. Why are people attached to that, and how do you get people past that?
Such a great question. One of the natural progressions and stages that we have to face in life is, how do we deal with shame and regret? Human beings, by nature, we're going to hurt people. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to experiencing embarrassing moments. We're going to fail. We're going to struggle. And in response to that, we can feel the range of intense negative emotions. And some people get stuck on that and feel very shameful about, things they may have done to hurt others. And they have a difficult time tolerating that. By medicalizing, certain aspects of the human experience, what I've seen culturally shift is that people have now used their mental health diagnosis as a way to justify previous behaviors, like, as if like it's removing some form of responsibility for them. Also, there's a tendency sometimes to feel invalidated, like, your emotions are not maybe taken seriously by others around you, depending on their
Hmm.
involvements and so forth. And so the diagnosis itself, it serves multiple functions. It relieves people from kind of that shameful experience. They can say, I acted that way because I had untreated ADHD, or I was really in a depressed state. I'm sorry, that's who I was, but I'm getting my depression treated now. It's the reason why it's justification for so many different struggles that people have. And then you adopt this identity of brokenness, because so many stories have been kind of created in their mind about who they are. And it can be really disorienting when you poke holes in a particular narrative, and then it provokes some of that shame and discomfort again, because they've attached to that. They might have gone on drugs, they might have worked with a physician or a certain therapist for a very long time. So you have to be sensitive to that. Relatively new in culture. I mean, that's only a phenomenon that we've seen for the past 30 years. Never previously has anyone ever wanted to identify as mentally ill, right? Like, that is has been an indicator in society that you're can't really be trusted, right? You're not doing well, you're unstable. No one would want to adopt that type of identity. It's almost counter to how we've evolved. So if one is like really struggling, there's high incentive to try to function again and rely on all mechanisms and support
Hmm.
systems to get back and earn the trust of your family members and community. That's shifted now quite dramatically, where people use these diagnoses as a way of creating community, identity, and to be relieved from shame and guilt from previous behavior.
Yeah, something it's part of a general pattern that has always frustrated me when I've noticed it, which is that people are afraid of hearing that they have power to change things, or hearing that, or maybe of encountering responsibility, because they can't. It's like people can't hear the idea of you can make this better, and not take another separate cognitive step and go, oh, that means I'm a failure. I've done something wrong. It's my fault. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I think it's possible, I guess is what I'm saying, to recognize that the choices you make and the things you do are where you can intervene and make things better without carrying, without sinking into remorse and shame for, oh, why didn't I do that earlier? Or there must be something morally wrong with me for not having made that choice already. And my personal interpretation of when people um, get defensive and attached to these kind of out of their control causes for what's going on, what's wrong in their life, is that when I tell them you can make it better, they hear that as shame on you for not having done that already. Which
Yeah.
is, you know, maybe that's just a matter of how I communicate. We're getting close to, you know, towards the end of the time here on our call. I want to hear a bit of the positive side, right? So what does, for example, what does a diagnostic approach look like that works? What does therapeutic context that works look like? Ryan in the chat here mentioned, uh, what did he say? The unified protocol for transdiagnostic treatment of emotional disorders. Have you? He says, have you heard of that? Because apparently it puts more emphasis on core emotional skills than specific diagnoses.
Yes, of course. I mean, that's, one of the discrepancies that I've, observed in my career is that there's this sound, robust research on, how to move through emotional conditions, how to self-regulate, how to tolerate distress. And it's very much in conflict with the medical model and the drug industry. And so I always questioned why people would be able to believe both could be true at the same time, because it was really interfering. Like if I had an anxiety disorder for a chemical imbalance, how can I learn mindfulness, change my diet, and expose myself to things that I was avoiding, and then all of a sudden I no longer have that same anxiety disorder? Was the chemical imbalance corrected? No, it speaks to the natural adaptation of the mind and the body, and our ability to learn how to self-regulate. So I think the transdiagnostic treatment of emotional disorders should be foundational, work that's used to guide interventions.
Awesome. Okay. Um, and yeah, what I guess, yeah, let's wrap this up. What works, and what would you encourage people, whether they're medical professionals, whether they're people trying to help themselves, people caught up and engaging with the wellness industry, like what is kind of the core idea you want to get across to people, and maybe a tool like something that people can use, that isn't drugs, that isn't the wellness retreat, that isn't the endless rumination and scrolling. Yeah, something people can use to help themselves.
Well, first of all, I want to say that in my personal opinion, the use of professional help for mental health should be rare. Most people should not require having to go down that route. And we should develop interventions and support systems for the small percentage of society that is, really suffering and on the fringe of the margins, and, unable to get themselves to function, right? So we should have people who have strong expertise in helping people who are really on the margins and are really struggling to function. Instead, we have a very large system with that serves the most mild and worried well of the population, where some of the most severe conditions can't get good care and they're just drugged. What I would like to do is shift culture. I would like to shift culture to pro-health, pro-human. I'd like us to return to our language of suffering, and that we can be open about that. I see in the chat there's about destigmatizing emotional vulnerability. I don't think that's what has happened. I think that's been a part of a psyop and a marketing conditioning to get people to think that way. Instead, I would rather have emotional vulnerability be part of our collective consciousness. Emotions are powerful energies that are used to move us through difficult times. I would like us to be more connected spiritually and in community. I want to return to the value of nature, purpose, meaning, serving others. I would like us to talk and speak about how what a life worth living actually looks like. And that is not the absence of negative emotional states. It's actually embracing them and moving them. Um, and I would like to move to a perspective of more energy and understanding of us as energetic beings, and that we have the capacity to raise our vibrational states, that we can move from low vibrational states to higher states of consciousness, of love, forgiveness, courage. And that would require us to retreat from a lot of the institutions and the apparatuses that are designed to keep us sick and dependent. You'd have to make conscious decisions to move away from the programming, whether that's media, social media, or just the automatic, repeated propaganda that is part of our everyday life that we are just immune to, because like we just hear it so often, it just becomes our reality, right? Like we know nothing different. So what I'd like to do is wake people up to their inherent resilience, that life is a gift. It's short. You're resilient. You're supposed to go through hard times. That's the polarity that exists. You can't experience the great emotions of joy, love, and freedom unless you understand what it is to experience that darkness. And so I would like us to embrace darkness more, not pathologize it. I would like us to support each other without it having to be a professional industry to do so, where you exchange insurance or your money. Like I would rather see that within families and communities. And to do that, we would have to embrace wisdom and tradition and a number of things that I feel like have been forgotten purposely in Western societies.
It's a big, ambitious, beautiful vision, but it's a good one. It's a good one. Keep fighting the fight, Roger. I think that's a fantastic thing to work towards. Yeah, brilliant. I really appreciate learning from you, and thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming on, Roger.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Mindform podcast. I'm Ryan A. Bush, founder and author of Designing the Mind and creator of Mindform. Mindform is an exclusive community and training platform for sculpting your psychological software. Members get access to a group of like-minded psychitects, including all of our guests on this podcast, gamified growth tools, events and retreats, and a collection of transformative programs for mental health and self-mastery. You can learn more and apply to join at mindform.io/podcast. I hope to see you inside.